All right, welcome everybody to the Cloud Innovation Podcast hosted by us, hosted by Global Dots. My name is Miguel. I'm the Director of Sales for Iberia and LATAM here at Global Dots, where we are one of the major resellers of CDN in the world. We work with 17 out of the 20 top CDNs. We're also experts in cloud innovations, and we have many partners in that field, one of which we will present today, as we're going to speak about the next generation of data analytics platform, not only for the cloud, also for CDN and web applications, cybersecurity, and data overall. So yeah, I'm excited for this episode. I'm going to present to you now Chris, who's joining us from CoreLogics. Maybe he can explain a little bit about his company and his title, and then we're going to go right into this week's episode.
Thank you very much, Miguel. I'm Chris. I'm the developer advocate for CoreLogics. So what CoreLogics is an observability company that processes logs, metrics, traces, and security information to create a single pane of glass across all of your observability needs. We've been around, we're an Israeli founded company. We've been around since 2016. The things that we are really, really good at, so we compete really heavily in the market, but the things that we're really good at is analyzing your data in stream and querying your data from remote. So what that means is that we process your data very, very quickly, very, very efficiently, faster than almost anybody else in the market. And we allow you to store data in your own cloud account. So we don't have these hidden charges where we basically just host things for you. You host things yourself, and you can query via the CoreLogics UI, enabling you to get that single pane of glass where you can view everything from the one dashboard, but also have the efficiency and the economies of scale of hosting some data basically in S3 or something similar to that. So these are the areas that we work really well, and this is what makes us really great for the use case that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and then maybe a little bit about yourself. How did you get to CoreLogics? What's your journey? Because you know Global Dots also for a while now.
Yeah. So I started out as a Java engineer over 8 years ago. Then I was a Java engineer for a few years. Still love Java, even though it's becoming less and less popular. Then I moved to the front end. So I was writing in JavaScript and then TypeScript, React.js and that kind of thing. Eventually moved into the sort of developer operations, DevOps, SRE kind of role, where I was responsible for building Kubernetes clusters, for managing sort of complex observability platforms using Elasticsearch and Prometheus and so on. And then finally, in more recent years, moved into engineering leadership. So I was the principal engineer at a very large retailer, where we were responsible for thousands of different services, costing a portfolio of over 100 million pounds. That's roughly 120 million US dollars of services. And we were cost optimizing, making more efficient, making it easier for engineers to do their job, but also comparing with procurement. And so competing vendors against one another. And essentially just making the best economic as well as technical steps forward for a large and very sprawling and complicated company.
Gotcha. And then just to simplify it a little bit, so would you say that CoreLogics is a CM? Is a fair assignation to you guys, or would you say it's a bit different?
Yeah, so we do a mixture of different things, but we are we have some of the best engineers in the world when it comes to things like Elasticsearch, Prometheus, that kind of thing, and the layers that we built around that and the product that we built in conjunction with that mean that we've got features that don't exist anywhere else in the market, and we're really sort of pushing the boundaries of what people will consider in observability. So as an example, archive query is a feature that we support, where most providers will do is allow you to compress your data for as long as you want, and if you ever need it again, you have to re-index your data back into your hot storage, which is just your storage that you're constantly querying. Very expensive, very inefficient, and very slow. So what we allow you to do is you store data in, for example, S3. You can still query it, even in the storage mode. You can still query it. The queries take between 15 and 20 seconds. And so this is something that nobody else on the market is doing with the volumes of data that we can do it with. So it's these kinds of things that we're really pushing the boundaries on. So yes, definitely SCMs in the observability space.
Yeah. So as you know, Global Dots and CoreLogics have been working together for a while. We actually have some customers together. I was fortunate enough to make my first project with Chris. And one of the key things that we're seeing is, Global Dots really heavily focuses on CDN. We're one of the biggest reseller in the CDN space and have been for many years, is the extreme detailed overview of CDN logs and how you can break that down into data that the engineers can actually work on. Can you go a bit into that route and also say what makes you different from other CMs in that regard?
Absolutely. So, firstly, the thing that differentiates CoreLogics is how we're architected. So, firstly, we're based on a technology, a proprietary technology that we built called Streamer. Streamer is a platform architecture and a collection of technologies. What we enable you to do is first and foremost analyze in stream. So what this means is that you can, as soon as the data reaches CoreLogics, we don't store it and we don't index it first, which is what almost everybody else does. I think everybody else stores it in some fashion before they process it. Some try to be more efficient by storing in, for example, NoSQL or document-based storages before they move on. But most will store, and this introduces latency. Storage I/O is one of the primary sources of latency in almost any system, actually. We analyze everything in stream, meaning it's the second it hits our APIs, it's triggering alerts, it's updating metrics, it's driving transformations that you set up and parsing rules and things like that, driving AI-driven machine learning as well to sort of pull out new insights. And that all happens the second it reaches CoreLogics, which makes it very, very fast, very efficient. And for the CDN use case, that fits perfectly because the thing that people do with CDNs is obviously they have two major use cases for CDNs. One is they have a huge volume of traffic and they need that caching layer and that protection to make sure that things are moving fast. And second, they need consistent latency across the entire world. So they have a very, very broad base of users. For the consistent latency thing, monitoring that and tracking that is difficult because you have a large volume of users all making requests. That can impact performance, it can slow down alarms, it can slow down your metrics. And so you want to make sure that whatever platform you go with can process that very, very fast. We can because of the way we're architected. And the former, the people just have huge, huge volumes of data. If you try and ingest those kinds of that scale of data that you would typically see on a CDN into a normal solution or into a solution that isn't prepared for it, you're going to impact query performance, you're going to impact load times, metrics, load times, alarm firing, taking it sometimes to the order of sort of 5 to 7 minutes in some of our experiments. Whereas at CoreLogics, you don't incur that kind of latency because we're not storing and indexing up front. We're processing and analyzing in stream and then storing and indexing towards the end of the process. Everything's still persistent, so you still have resilience and failover, but that sort of official storage and indexing point is done way later in the process, and that makes for a much more powerful, much more effective system. And so that's why we fit the CDN use case really well.
One of the main use cases for the CDN is to reduce latency. Yeah, if you then have latency by analyzing the data coming out of the CDN, that is counterproductive. So let me just ask, why are the others not doing it also in real time? I mean, everything is better in real time, right? What makes you different? How can your platform be so much faster here than others?
Well, CoreLogics took a brave step in terms of making a decision a few years ago that this was going to be the thing that differentiates us. Lots of companies have, it's a natural function of software engineering that you accumulate legacy over time, and it becomes more and more difficult to make these kinds of radical changes. Yeah. We've made that decision a few years ago. We were direct and deliberate about it, and it's paid off. And so not many companies are willing to push themselves forward in a direction, but that's what we've done, and that's the outcome. Lots of other companies we've found, it's actually that their cost model, that their whole business is sort of oriented towards charging you as much as possible. So they want you to store logs and with them for as long as possible. They want that to happen because it's more cost effective for them. They can just put it into an S3 bucket, onto a file system, forget about it, and charge you a 70% markup. That's something that they can just get away with, and no one can really do anything about it. Whereas for us, it's way more efficient for us, so it's much less costly for us, and it's better for the customer if, for example, your long-term logs get stored in your own AWS account. You pay way less for the S3 storage costs, and we pay a lot less in terms of monitoring and moving all that data around. So it's we basically aligned our interests with what the customer wants, and made our business model in a way that makes for more efficient data and more rapid querying. So that's something that what differentiates us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember we have some CDN customers that have a high complexity. Why? Because they have hundreds of subdomains. Maybe it's a company that has sub companies and they have sub websites. So we sometimes talking about 300, 400 different domains who all need to be under a web application firewall, who all need to be protected against DDoS attacks, who all need to be protected from bots that really aggressively come to the websites, scour your data. All of this. So there is a huge amount of data being pressed out of the CDN, especially if you have several hundreds domains. Often these companies have domains, legacy domains that, just have 1-2% of the traffic, but they're equally important. Yeah. So how can you make all these big amount of data and make it so that the user looking at this can act and have some real life use cases from it? How can you break it down basically so it's legible for the CDN customers?
Sure. So one of the things that immediately comes to mind, so most of the analysis that you do with CDN data comes from the logs. Not many of the CDNs export their metrics and things. They're usually available in some kind of dashboard, some proprietary dashboard in the CDN UI, but the logs are the thing that you can export and get access to. The immediately one of the features that comes to mind is our log aggregation feature. So what log aggregation does is it will look at all of your similar log files, actually machine learning driven, but it will look at all of your similar log files that have similar keys and values in them. So for example, your CDN logs will all follow the same format. They'll just have different values. It will cluster all of those logs together, and it will tell you things like 35% of your logs have this endpoint for this key value, and 23% of your logs came from this IP address, for example. So immediately, just with that information, you could see the spread of traffic and where it's coming from. You could see which pages are really popular, which pages are loading very, very slowly, which pages are loading probably maybe too quickly, which pages are firing errors consistently. You can break your data down using just that one feature. We also have some really sophisticated parsing rules, which will allow you to break down your logs into, okay, so this part of the log here is actually the metric for latency. And you can generate metrics using our logs to metrics feature from that. So you can actually take the logs, break them down into metrics, and store them as metrics. Now, the beauty of doing that as well is that metrics are much less expensive to hold. So you can hold your metrics in CoreLogics a default of 12 months. You can do longer if you want, but it costs a fraction. It's half of it's way less than holding logs. Much more powerful. So we have a bunch of different techniques there for allowing you to render things. We have a visualization called data map, even, where once you have your data in metrics form, you can group it in a sort of visual UI by country, by city, by that kind of thing. And finally, the last thing is we offer enrichment capability. So an IP address will come in, and you can enrich your log with geolocational data. So based on that IP address, we can say, hey, it came from this country, it came from this city. So if that data isn't available in your CDN logs, we can add that in and decorate it after the fact for you. So there's a bunch of different capabilities that CoreLogics has that not just architecturally, but feature-wise, that will make parsing and understanding your CDN logs really, really sort of a joy.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And the customers that we're implementing to, there's always this aha moment, because if you're working with the CDN, if you're working with CDN logs, you know how much raw data it is, how difficult it is to read. And then when you see something just broke down in actual actions that you have to do, they love it. They're always really happy with the outcome. Yeah. But let's move away a little bit from the CDN. I mean, I like talking about it. That's where I'm coming from. That's where GlobalDot's really strong. But also we do a lot in the cloud. And of course, you can connect probably to most of the clouds. Talk a little bit about where can you connect data to CoreLogics, on-premise, cloud, what are the limitations, what's working, what's not?
Yeah, so the thing that we're really happy with at CoreLogics is we're really against vendor lock-in. We really don't, because a lot of other providers, they do that. And again, that's part of their business model, is to get involved and get as much proprietary software into your system as possible, and then you can't leave. What we do is we leverage open telemetry very heavily. So you can create a fully open source integration into CoreLogics using for logs, metrics, and traces, using the open telemetry software and no CoreLogics proprietary software. Everything's completely open source. We actually contribute into the open telemetry project to do this. So what this enables us to do is to say to customers, hey, like if you can run the Open Telemetry agent on any environment, and that this thing runs in, it can run on premise, it can run in the cloud, it can run, Kubernetes clusters, raw EC2 instances, random Docker images, it can run anywhere you like. If you can run that, you can ship data to CoreLogics. We also, for the security side of things, we have the security traffic analyzer. This is something that will run in your account, but it doesn't really affect much of your data. It doesn't really touch much of your infrastructure, but what it does is it actually captures AWS API calls, and what it'll do is it will tell you, and GCP as well. I do apologize. It will detect, for example, things like if you have an EC2 instance that allows direct access from the internet, and it will flag that up for you. So it's a mixture, but for the observability side of things, for logs, metrics, and traces, you can connect completely open source using Open Telemetry. We also connect via, all of the normal observability tools that you would expect. So things like Elasticsearch, Prometheus, FluentBit, FluentD, and so on. These like sort of really ubiquitous, really well-known logs and metrics solutions and tracing solutions as well. We can connect via those as well. So there's a myriad of different ways. I think our extensions page, our integrations page, has like well over 100 different integration points at this stage. So yeah, if you run it,
you probably got to be able to connect it, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but that's interesting. So, in your experience, how much is moving into the cloud and how much is still on premise? So what we're seeing at Global Dots is it highly depends on the company. If it's a young company, they 99% cloud native. Yeah. If a medium young company, they maybe cloud primary, they still have some on premise, but they cloud primary. And then for the enterprise, for the big guys that have been there for 50, 100, hundreds of years, most of them are still running most of the infrastructure on premise, and all the new applications that are coming on board now are then directly deployed in the cloud. Yeah. So, but what is your insights from there, as you see many customers sending their data? Where's the most data coming from? Is it still on premise? Is it shifting to cloud? Is it coming from web applications? Can you give us some insights there?
From an observability perspective, here's what I would say. The vast majority of companies that are talking about observability are doing so from a cloud perspective. The reason why they're doing that is because the cloud has kind of removed a great deal of concern for them in terms of the operational stuff. So the thing I always like to talk about is one company I worked for where we had our own data center, and we had an outage because the cleaner who cleaned the data center once a week didn't show up, and something got into the intake fan of one of the servers, and it broke something. And it was like, we have to make sure the cleaner shows up on a weekly basis to make sure that our software runs, So that experience was really like, wow, that there's a lot to think about here. And then, of course, that's not even the technical stuff, that's just the logistics. So AB power supplies, failover networking, geo-resilience, these kinds of things. So the companies that have their own data centers are typically massively concerned with these low-level things. The observability conversation I've found, especially with the big enterprise companies, they haven't started there yet. They're not quite at that point because they're still trying to deal with all this operational stuff. So whenever someone's talking to me about observability, the vast majority of companies are coming from a cloud perspective. I will say, however, in my role as the developer advocate, I go to a lot of different conferences, and when I'm speaking with people, there are some companies now that are moving back away from the cloud and back onto on-premise, because they believe that the cost savings they can achieve on-premise are significant, and they have the upfront capital to be able to buy or lease the necessary hardware and the space to do that. It's definitely an interesting trend, and I don't know whether it will continue or not, but it's something to be mindful of, because those companies are leaving the cloud and they're accustomed to all of the power and the features that, for example, a provider like AWS has. You can spin up a VM in 3 minutes. It's not easy to replicate that locally at scale on your own hardware. So it'll be really interesting to see how that develops over the next few years.
Yeah, and where it kind of clicks in. Yeah, at the moment they say it's around 15% of the IT budget is cloud, and then 85 is non-cloud. They say it will go up to 80-20, so the other way around, basically, that 80% of the IT budget will be cloud, and then 20% will be on-premise. But who knows? Yeah, maybe it end up at 50-50. Yeah, we're seeing something similar when it comes to cost, and cloud costs are going to go up next year. 20-30% with inflation, with computing cost, with all of this. So it's going to be super interesting, and I'm glad we can handle both ways, yeah, and be dependent on where the tide goes. Yeah? So the concept of a CM is nothing new. Yeah, you didn't reinvent the wheel here. There's big players. Probably most known is Splunk on the market. But maybe you can tell us a bit, what makes you guys different from what is out there. Why are customers changing from traditional CMs to you? Yeah, we always in Global Dots, we call you the CM 2.0, yeah, or 4.0, depends on how excited you get on the customer call, yeah. But maybe talk a little about the things that make you different from what's on the market right now.
I think industry-wide, there's a great deal of discontent with many of the observability providers right now. The reason why is because it's almost a meme now, actually. If you open Twitter and you just type in like Splunk bill, you will see like people like nobody's happy with how much they're paying for this stuff. And that's not a function. I don't know what the main driver of that is. I have some suspicions, but that is a really prevalent trend across the industry right now. So that is one thing that we see, and one of the things that these companies don't do very well is cost optimization. And I think one of the things that we're cautious about is that every feature we build, we think, well, how much of this data does the customer actually need? How much of this data does the customer actually care about? So, for example, they're ingesting 10 terabytes of logs a day, but only because those logs have a single number in them and they're driving graphs.
You have to save the 10 terabyte, or can you just deal with the one single thing that you're looking for?
Precisely.
Right?
And this is something that we do really well that other providers don't necessarily do. The second thing is that those providers, as we talked about before, they're architected differently. They're architected in a more traditional way, store first and then start to do the processing. Because we don't do that, we are not only faster, it actually unlocks different capabilities. So, for example, if you're ingesting, I will say, logs, metrics, and traces through CoreLogics, you can correlate all these different data points together. So many of the traditional observability providers, what they'll do is they'll give you a log screen and you can only do the logs and there's no view of metrics. You go to a metrics screen and you can query your metrics. You go to a traces screen and you can only see your traces. And they kind of silo this. So we started referring to this as a data silo, where you will trigger your alert. For example, if you have an alarm, you will say, I have an outage. This outage situation can be triggered by either the CPU exceeding 95%, more than 5% of the application logs are error logs, or the traces, the latency increases, 300-400 milliseconds. Any of those three are the situation. You define 3 alerts there. If one of those fire, you have to check if the other 2 are fired to make sure that the situation has happened. So this is what we started thinking about as a siloed alerting strategy, and it's a product of this idea of splitting the data up and splitting observability data up. The thing that we do really, really nicely is that every time we build a feature, we think, well, how does this correlate with other data? So if you go into the CoreLogics Traces UI, you can open up a span. You can see the logs that the application was producing when it produced that span. And then you can move across and you can see things like the metrics of the Kubernetes pod or the EC or the host instance, and what they were a couple of minutes before and a couple of minutes after and during that span. So what that means is that you're correlating all of your data types together, so that rather than being like, okay, the metrics alert has gone off or the metrics have increased, I'll go look at the traces. Oh, the traces are quite slow, I'll go look at the logs. You can, for example, open a trace and see everything straight away.
Yeah.
And that's a function of processing in stream because the data is all being moved together as one. Rather than being separated off into different storage locations, then triggering lots of different pipelines and eventually being brought together after maybe minutes of latency. So that's like one really common example of this. The second thing that we do that sets us apart, I think, is that we have this concept of flow alerts. So most providers, like I say, you can define an alert, and actually I think every open source solution for this as well, you define an alert around a single measurement. So for example, metrics, logs, traces, this trace has exceeded this. Like I say, the problem is that outages aren't just like, the CPU has exceeded 95%. Sometimes it exceeds 95% and it's fine. So what actually we found, one of the things that we thought about was outages are actually a sequence of events happening in time. So the CPU exceeds 95%, then some error logs start to increase, then the page slows down by 30% or something. And that series of events is something that you care about. for example, or you might care about one or two of them individually, but the whole series of events is a real problem. That's something to be really concerned about. So we built flow alerts, which allows you to join together lots of different smaller alarms so you can have a single flow alert that describes that covers metrics, logs, and traces. And that way you have this kind of like full stack alerting strategy, break down the alert silo and start thinking about your data and how it correlates with the other data points that you've got, rather than, okay, I have one alert over here, and if this fires, I then have to find out if the other alerts are fired, what do the logs say, and so on. We should try and bring all that information forward. The second big bonus of that as well is that it bakes the root cause into the alert. So you stop defining alerts like CPU has exceeded 95%, and you start defining alerts like a database slowdown has caused page load failures on the checkout application, for example. The root cause becomes baked into the alert. Bigger alerts, fewer alerts, firing, less alerts, spam, and so on. But much faster mean time to diagnosis, much faster mean time to recovery. So those are some of the things that really set us apart from the rest of the market in the SIEM space.
What is next? What features would you like to have that are not there yet? Can you tell a bit about the roadmap, where it's going? What can customers expect for in the future from CoreLogics?
Yeah, so CoreLogics has recently released a whole suite of sort of APM features. So the next sort of big drive for us is more APM, like a much more sophisticated APM. We want to get to a point where we're completely leading the market in our APM features. Right now, we're on par with the market, and we think that's okay, but we're not happy with that. So we're trying to push forward and really hit some features that are going to blow some people's minds. The second thing I think for us is all about making these really nice, tight, intuitive integrations with common technologies. So we're already doing that with Kubernetes. So for example, if you open a trace, a span within a trace, it will tell you the Kubernetes pod and host metrics that happened at the same time as that. We want to do way more of that. So we already ingest all this data, and it's just a case of building the features into the platform to ingest the data from different places. So it's all about making a really intuitive product that you just give the data to it and it will immediately give you insights. Our mean time to insight is one of those measurements that we're trying to minimize that as much as possible, minimize the effort required to do that. So that's very much the theme of our backlog going forward is native integrations with common technologies, and really killing it in the APM space, really pushing it as hard as we can in terms of that. So yeah, and finally, the breaking the archive idea, I think, is something that we're already doing, but there's more to do, and actually some of it is still in development, so it's not wise to talk about it too publicly, but it's super exciting. Is you're talking about terabytes and terabytes of data pulled out of S3 in a single query in seconds, and it's outrageous. I don't even like I'm not actively involved in the team. It's just, so I'm not writing the code, and it's like, how are you doing this? How is this much data coming out? But it's working, and the benchmarks are looking at points. We're issuing queries five times faster than Athena for a series of different use cases. So it's really blazing fast. And this idea, what we found with customers is that because the archive is so fast, they stop fearing the archive. They stop fearing compressing holding their data into S3 or something. And so they do more of it. And because they do more of that, they can hold less in hot storage. So they get faster queries, more accessible data, and they pay less. And so over time, customers see an initial, on average, they see an initial between 40 and 70% cost saving by just moving to CoreLogics. And then over time, they get more efficient and they get cheaper because they work out, okay, CoreLogics has this feature we can exploit, and now we pay 6% less. And that's what we're seeing with customers constantly. And like I said, because of the way we're architected, if the customer optimizes their stuff in a way, or their data in a way that is more efficient for us as well. So we want them to do more of it. We want as much of it as possible. The more optimized and the more efficient they are, the more efficient we are. So so it's one of the things that we're really happy with.
Yeah, you mentioned it before. You're looking for this win-win situation where you help your customers grow and then they grow with you. And of course, so a lot of technical people are going to go, oh, this sounds amazing. I want it, but I know already that if I request a budget for this, my CFO or my team manager or my CTO, they will say no. Yeah. So can you name a use case? You start talking about some cost reduction that, but if you would speak directly to the CFO, who has maybe not a technical understanding so deeply, what would you tell him in order for him to say, you know what, this is the right piece of technology. We need this because it will increase our return of investment over time.
Sure. So there's a few key points that I think are always worth raising just from a purely economic perspective. One, the operational cost of your observability data, if it's high now, it's only going up. This is an increasing cost. This isn't going to flatline anytime soon, because the more applications you've got, the more expensive it's going to become. And the complexity of the insights you're trying to generate it's only going to increase because you're competing with everybody else. And they're all generating more and more complex insights. So you need to keep up with that. And that needs more data, not less. So the cost is only going to increase, and the speed and what you need out of the platform is only going to increase, up to a point where you start incurring an opportunity cost because you're not getting the same insights that everybody else is getting. So not only are you paying a lot for your logs, you're also paying the opportunity cost of not being able to access some of these cutting edge features. So that's like a sort of basic economics answer of right now you're hitting operational cost, soon you're going to hit the opportunity cost, and those two things together is enormous.
Yeah, and also cost of making mistakes, right? If you don't look at your data properly, mistakes are going to be made that, you know, they need cleaning up, they need redoing. Yeah, all of this kind of has to take into account.
For sure, and it's the cost of an outage is enormous, and so we we're fundamentally we try and think about what our customers are doing. It's one of the things that we do. We tackle the data problems like a data company, but the observability problems we tackle those like a company that was founded and ran by engineers, which we are. So we fundamentally understand what our users are trying to do with the data, and that's how we build things in a way that's really, really user focused, really, really focused on making sure that the kinds of problems that engineers are solving on a regular basis are something that CoreLogics can do for you really, really well. So in terms of a time spend, in terms of just an engineering effort spend, people always underestimate the cost of engineers. Engineers are really expensive these days.
Yeah, and it takes time to do things. And then if they do a mistake, they have to redo them, right? And you have to pay, 1 to 3 times for the same task. It's just how it works there.
And those people, those retries are the probably some of the most expensive people in your company retrying stuff. They are literally the biggest cost in a lot of companies is how am I going to pay my engineers? And so your goal is to optimize their time as much as you can, working towards things that will make you money. That's the only way you can get your ROI. If they're sitting around trying to maintain this big, massive Elasticsearch cluster, well, they're not, and that's time they're not spending building features or building the things that make your product stand out in your industry. That is opportunity cost, enormous opportunity cost. Difficult to quantify, but it's very, very real. So those are the kinds of things that if I was talking to someone very senior without a technical background, I'd start there from an economics perspective, and then just talk about obviously the great features that CoreLogics has that sets it apart from the competition and what that could unlock from. Depends on the company, obviously.
Yeah, makes sense. So we made happy the CTO. Now we make happy the CFO. Let's talk about the CISO. Let's make just a combination to security. How does all this data help the security conscious CISO in his job?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I've seen personally in my own career, but something that we've seen quite a lot as well, is that compliance is typically seen as this like big bang thing. So for example, if you want to be SOC 2 compliant, so from a CISO perspective, what you want to move towards is continuous compliance. So continuously moving towards continuously having visibility of what your platform posture is like, what your security, your overall threat position looks like, and having that constant research. So one of the things that CoreLogics does, we have Snowbit is our features. Snowbit allows you to track continuous compliance across your cloud accounts. You can open a dashboard and literally see your progress towards, for example, SOC 2 compliance. You can see that literally on the dashboard. So you can track that. It becomes a sort of drumbeat and a metric for CISOs to use to be like, hey, we're 3% on this week. Great, let's move forward. We have hundreds of alerts built in out of the box. So if you just ingest your data into CoreLogics, click one button, you can deploy an extension that will handle hundreds of RDS situations, for example, anything ranging from permissions, networking, versions of images, so that if they have known vulnerabilities in them, we can tell you about that, and so on. So it's
you can divide it per person. No, you can say, okay, we want this technical person to receive this information via this channel, and then you can basically break it down into small little silos of information that are automatically forwarded as soon as it happens. Yeah.
Absolutely, and one of the CoreLogics generally, so Snowbird is baked into the CoreLogics platform. It benefits from like really mature technology. You can manage sort of organizations and teams, so you can say like these guys can view this data, these guys are responsible for this, and they have this much processing power and so on. So it's really easy to subdivide your organization into CoreLogics and Snowbits, and then get all that benefit from there. The big thing as well is that Snowbit has a security research team built in, so we're providing that as a service. So you don't have to hire really expensive, really skilled security analysts that are constantly researching and checking things. We have that as a service if you want it. So it's like one of those things that we can just give to you. And that's one of the things that we're doing that really differentiates us from the rest of the market is this sort of this service offering that we're giving here from a security perspective.
100%. And also what we're doing a lot here in Global Dots when we implement security and compliance platforms specifically for one area. Could be, for example, web application, could be in the cloud, could be for on-premise. Yeah, this data then connects to you. So it's a complete flow from the data being generated to an action being taken by an employee within the customers. No, it makes a lot of sense. It makes the entire thing more fluid. It's good for the CFO. It's good for the CISO. It's good for the CTO. It's good for the CIO if he wants to look into the future. He needs the data to provide it. Yeah. So, what we always recommend is having a good CM in place, having it connected to the right data, the visibility. Information is power, and power is what you need to keep your company moving forward. So I think in the next years, people are going to be more focusing on analyzing this data, and we will see a lot of big things coming from CoreLogics. Really excited to be your partner, and we're looking forward to finishing up new products and new projects together. Yeah. And if anyone out there is listening who wants some more information about CoreLogics or Global Dots, just reach out to me directly via LinkedIn. Reach out to Chris. More than happy to help. And yeah, it was an exciting 1 hour. I think we're more or less there from the time. I'm sure we're gonna do a follow-up on this in the next year. But yeah, thank you so much for taking time, for being here. Yeah, I see you do some music. Looking at your background. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, the weekend is near. I hope you get to play a little bit. And yeah,
so do I.
From your side, let us know. But it was a pleasure talking to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Miguel. It was an absolute pleasure being here.
All right. That was it from the Cloud Innovation Podcast, and I hope to see you again. Next topic will be even more interesting, so stay tuned.